My parents told me I was a burden the same night they handed my brother our family beach house. We were sitting around the long driftwood table in the living room, the windows open to the sound of waves hitting the shore. The air smelled like salt and sunscreen and the burned edges of the lasagna my mom always made on our last night of vacation. I thought we were doing what we'd always done. One more dinner, one more round of sunset pictures, one more argument about who forgot to bring the board games. Instead, my dad cleared his throat and slid a folder across the table toward my brother. "We have some news," he said, trying to sound casual and failing. My brother, Mason, frowned and opened the folder. I watched his eyes enlarge as he took in the first page. "Is this the deed?" he asked. My mother beamed, one hand fluttering to her chest like she was in a commercial. "We've decided it's time," she said. "The house needs to stay in the family, and you're the one we can count on to carry it forward." Every word landed like a stone. The house. Not just any house. The small, weathered cottage on a stretch of North Carolina sand that had been the only place I ever felt my family wasn't completely broken. My grandparents bought it before I was born. Every summer, we'd cram ourselves and an unreasonable number of cousins into its 2 bedrooms and 1 sagging pull-out couch. We painted the porch rails together. We fixed the leaky faucet together. We buried each other in the sand, made midnight grilled cheese, watched storms roll in from the screened porch. When I was a kid, I thought the house loved us back. Now, I watched my parents hand it to Mason with a clean, practiced smile. He looked between them, then at me, like he knew I was watching something I shouldn't be. "Are you sure?" he said. "What about—" My mother cut him off. "Your sister understands," she said. "You have a family. You'll have children who can enjoy this place. She has her own path." She said it like I had chosen some vague, irresponsible life path instead of working 2 jobs and trying to finish school. I felt my throat tighten. My dad put his hand over the folder. "Look," he said, "we can only afford to officially pass it to one of you right now without getting eaten alive in taxes. And let's be honest, sweetheart, you're barely staying afloat as it is. Taking on a property would just be too much. You don't need that kind of burden." He said the word like it was logical. My mother added, almost gently, "You've always been our free spirit. Responsibility weighs you down. We can't risk you dragging us all under if something happens." The word shifted. Burden. They weren't talking about the house anymore. They were talking about me. Something inside my chest went cold. I looked at the wood grain of the table because I knew if I met anyone's eyes, I might cry. And I refused to cry over lasagna and legal documents. Mason opened his mouth again, but my father patted his shoulder. "You're doing us a favor," he said. "Someone has to step up. Your sister, well, she's just not built for this kind of commitment." It was like watching someone close a door you didn't even know you were standing in front of. They didn't just choose him. They defined me as the person you never give anything important to. The burden. I pushed my chair back slowly. "Thank you," I said, "because that's what you say when your parents give away your childhood and call you deadweight in the same breath." My mother frowned. "Don't be dramatic, Raylan. We're just being practical." I walked out to the porch and stared at the dark water until the folder was signed. I listened to them laugh inside, toasting Mason's responsibility. And somewhere between the clinking glasses and the waves, I made a quiet promise. If I was going to be a burden in their story no matter what I did, then I might as well stop trying to prove I wasn't. I would build a life where nobody got to define me that way, and one day, I would make sure the deed they'd pushed across the table without even looking at me ended up in my hands, on my terms. Not because they gave it, because they had no choice. I was born second and wrong for their script. Mason came 3 years before me, blonde and blue-eyed and big-laughed. the kind of boy people wanted to high-five in grocery store aisles. He played soccer and little league and eventually football. My parents learned the names of every coach, every referee, every other parent on the bleachers. I was the kid who liked books and repairing things. I was the one who learned how to patch drywall from YouTube when Mason's indoor basketball phase got out of hand. The one who found the shutoff valve when a pipe burst in the beach house one June weekend and water started pouring into the kitchen. "Thank God you were here," my dad said that day, shaking his head as I stood barefoot in a puddle. He said it like I was a handy tool he was glad to have around, not like I was someone who deserved as much as Mason did. At school, I got good grades without much help. My parents came to 1 or 2 award ceremonies, but only if they didn't conflict with his games. "At least you don't need us as much," my mother would say. "You're so independent, Ray." Independent slowly morphed into on your own. By the time I was 15, it was just assumed I'd fend for myself. At the beach house, that meant I did the unglamorous work. Mason and my cousins carried coolers down to the sand and disappeared for hours, playing volleyball or trying to flirt with strangers. I stayed behind to clean out the fridge, strip beds, sweep sand off the porch. I knew where every breaker switch was. I knew which window always stuck when it rained and how to pry it loose without cracking the frame. When a storm knocked out power one summer, it was me who dug out the candles and made sandwiches in the dark. Nobody ever asked me if I wanted to go down to the water instead. They just called out, "Ray, can you handle it?" and left. It took a long time for me to notice that my independence was mostly convenience for them. Mason, meanwhile, couldn't do much wrong. When he crashed the family car at 17, my parents called it a wake-up call and quietly paid the insurance increase. When he blew through his college fund in 2 years and dropped out, they sighed and said, "He's finding himself," and refinanced the house to help him start a landscaping business. The beach house was his reward for existing the way they liked. Even when he barely showed up for maintenance weekends, they blamed his busy schedule. When I asked once if he could maybe handle the broken railing I'd been fixing for 3 summers, my dad snapped, "He's got a lot on his plate, Ray. You work part-time at a bookstore. You have time." He said it in front of my aunt. She put a hand on my arm later and whispered, "You know he doesn't mean it." Like that made it better. By my mid-20s, I was working 2 jobs and still finishing my degree part-time. My parents called me directionless. "Your brother may have stumbled, but at least he's committed to something," my mother said once on the phone while I walked home from a late shift. "You're all over the place. It's hard to help someone who doesn't know what she wants." What I wanted, more than anything, was to not be the emergency contact they called only when something broke. The summer they handed Mason the deed, I had just lost my roommate and taken on extra hours to cover the full rent. I was tired. I was fragile in the way you only realize in hindsight. So when my father used the word burden, it found every crack and settled in. Burden. Too unstable. Too risky. Not worth investing in. After that night, I packed my suitcase with deliberate slowness. My mother hugged me at the door, smelling like sunscreen and wine. "Don't overthink this," she said. "It's just property. You'll understand when you have a family." I smiled without showing my teeth. "I do understand," I said. "Just not the way you think." Mason stood on the porch, the folder already under his arm. He looked guilty. "Ray, I didn't ask for." "It's fine," I lied. "Take care of it." On the drive back to my apartment, the word burden flashed in my brain with every highway sign. By the time I turned the key in my front door, I knew 2 things. 1, if I stayed close to them, they would keep using that label every time I didn't live my life the way they wanted. 2, I was never going to convince them I wasn't a burden by trying harder to please them. The only proof they respected wore a $sign. So I decided, quietly, that was what I would build. Not for them, for me, and for whatever life I could carve out far beyond the shadow of that blue-shuttered house on the sand. Starting over when you feel like dead weight is messy. I knew how to work. That part I had down. I didn't know how to stop working for people who didn't see me. I picked up every extra shift I could at the bookstore and at the tiny cafe that sat between my apartment and the bus stop. I stopped paying for small luxuries without even thinking about it. No more takeout, no more new clothes. Every spare dollar went into a savings account with a stupid little nickname, not a burden. Corny, but I needed the reminder. The first year after the beach house fiasco, my parents called less. Mason sent me a few photos of renovations they'd made. New paint, new outdoor furniture. "So it doesn't look so tired," he texted. In every picture, he stood in the center. The house looked wrong somehow, like it was wearing clothes that didn't fit its history. I unfollowed my mother's social media after she posted a long caption about passing the torch to the next responsible generation, with a photo of Mason holding a set of keys I had helped him find twice when we were kids. I waited for a message acknowledging how that might make me feel. It never came. Instead, my father called one night and asked if I could come down for a work weekend to help fix a leaking roof section. I looked at my bank balance. I thought about the gas it would take, the unpaid time off, the way I would end up on that roof while they praised Mason for supervising. "I can't," I said. "I'm slammed with shifts." He sighed. "I thought you liked helping," he said. "We're all pitching in here." I hung up and felt both guilty and oddly light. Saying no the first time is the hardest. I kept my world small and focused for a while. I finished my degree, finally, late but mine. Statistics and business. Not glamorous, but it made sense to me. Numbers didn't call you a burden when you did exactly what they predicted. I got a junior analyst job at a small firm downtown. The pay wasn't huge, but it was stable. I started learning about real estate from a coworker, a woman named Jess who owned 2 small rental properties and talked about cash flow over lunch like other people talked about reality shows. The more she explained, the more something inside me pinged. Property wasn't just a thing you got handed if you were the favored child. It was a thing you could buy, manage, leverage, especially if you were the one who noticed every leak and loose shutter before anyone else did. "How did you afford your first place?" I asked her one day. She shrugged, scraped together a down payment, found a place that needed love but not surgery, lived in it while I fixed it up. "You'd be good at it. You see problems before they explode." I laughed. "Yeah, my parents used to love that. Use it for you this time," she said. "Not for them." While I quietly studied amortization schedules and repair budgets, Mason's texts started to sound more strained. "The storm last month ripped half the shingles off," he wrote once. "Dad had to help with the deductible. Contractors are insane," he wrote once. Another week. "Hot water heater died. Mom's freaking about the cost." I pictured my parents sitting at that same driftwood table, complaining about expenses they had never once mentioned when I was the one catching dripping ceilings in mixing bowls. "You'll figure it out," I replied most of the time, because that was the line they had given me for years. Behind the scenes, I built an emergency fund, then a small investment account, then a line in my budget labeled first place, even though I had no idea yet where that would be. For a long time, the beach house felt like a wound I walked around carefully, something we didn't mention directly. Then, almost 3 years to the day after that lasagna dinner, my phone lit up with my mother's name at an hour she never called. I stared at the screen for a second before answering. "Hey," I said. She didn't waste time. "Harper, we need to talk about the house," she said. Her voice had that thin, brittle edge she used when the world wasn't doing what she wanted. A cold little part of me thought, finally, the story was about to change. My mother never admitted to panic. She wrapped everything in phrases like "a little tight" or "temporary hiccup." That night, she skipped the euphemisms. "The property taxes went up again," she said, words tripping over each other. "The insurance is insane after these last storms. Your brother's business had a slow season. We're bleeding money keeping that place." I leaned back in my chair and let her talk. "We've done everything we can," she went on. "We remortgaged, we cut back, but we're at the point where the bank is breathing down our necks. Mason loves that house. You know how much it means to him. We can't let it go under." There it was. Not, "we can't lose our family place." We can't let Mason lose his toy. What are you asking me? I said, even though I already knew. She sighed dramatically. You're good with numbers, she said. You have that job. Maybe you could help cover the payments for a while, just until his business picks back up. I thought about that folder sliding across the table. The way my father had looked at me when he called me a burden. The way my mother had called me directionless while she handed a multi-$100,000 asset to my brother because he had a family. My first instinct, the one they had trained into me, twitched. Fix it. Save them. Be useful. Instead, I asked, how far behind are you? She hesitated. That's not really... How far, Mom? Finally, she said it. And the number was worse than I expected. The mortgage was in both my parents' and Mason's names. They had maxed out a line of credit to redo the kitchen and bathrooms to increase value. Now the bank was considering foreclosure. You remember Victor? I asked quietly. The old owner? Of course, she said. He sold to some investment company, didn't he? They raised all the fees. It's part of the problem. I almost laughed. I'm part of that investment company, I said. I bought into the LLC that owns the house 3 years ago. She was silent long enough that I could hear my own heartbeat. What? She whispered. I'm a co-owner, I repeated. Have been since a week after that dinner. You never said anything, she hissed, like I had picked up a cigarette habit instead of a legal interest in real estate. Kind of like how you never said the deed you pushed across the table that night already labeled me a burden, I replied. She breathed in sharply. I didn't. You did, I said. You made a choice, and I made one too. I took every skill you only valued when it fixed your messes and used it to build something that has my name on it. She switched tracks. Fine, whatever. But that just means you can help. You can talk to the bank, restructure things, do your spreadsheets, save the place. I stared at the ceiling. A part of me wanted to march into the branch manager's office and charm numbers into lining up to protect the peeling blue shutters I'd painted as a teenager. But another part, louder now, remembered Jess's voice. Use it for you this time. Send me the latest mortgage statement, I said. All of it. Mortgage, taxes, insurance. I'll look. She exhaled in relief. I knew you'd come through, she said. You're always so good with this stuff. There it was. The old pattern creeping back in. Fixer. Quiet savior. Convenient daughter. When I hung up, I opened my laptop and pulled up the county's property records. The house was worth more than my parents had ever admitted. Even in its slightly worn state, the market had gone a little wild. I also saw something else. A notice of default scheduled if payments weren't brought current within 60 days. I spent the next week running numbers like my life depended on it. It kind of did. Not in the sense of survival, in the sense of who I was going to be for the next decade. I met with a loan officer at my bank on my lunch breaks. We went over my income, my debt, my credit. 3 years of saying no to vacations and new clothes and takeout had done something. I qualified. Not easily. Not without swallowing a lump in my throat when I saw the payment schedule. But I did. The house wasn't some impossible jewel on a pedestal anymore. It was wood and plaster and a list of numbers I could read. One evening, I met my parents and Mason at their kitchen table. The same table where they had once slid a folder away from me. Mason looked exhausted. His business had clearly taken more hits than my mother had admitted. My father looked older. My mother still had that tight, brittle edge. She expected me to pull a miracle out of a hat. I put a folder on the table. It looked a lot like the one I'd watched them give Mason. I can bring the mortgage current, I said. I can refinance it under terms that won't crush whoever holds it. I can keep the bank from taking the house. Relief flooded my mother's face. I knew you'd fix it, she said. On one condition, I added. They all froze. It comes to me, I said. You sign the deed over. The new mortgage is in my name only. No co-signing, no secret lines of credit. I take full financial responsibility and I take full ownership. My mother recoiled. That's ridiculous, she said. We can't just take the house from your brother. I looked at Mason. He looked down at his hands. Can you afford to save it yourself? I asked him softly. His silence was the answer. My father rubbed his temples. This is a lot of pressure for you, he said. You've had trouble staying steady before. What if you lose your job? We can't risk the house. There it was again. Burden. Here's the risk I'm willing to take, I replied. With my own money. You're welcome to say no and let the bank take it. Or you can trust that the so-called burden you never thought could handle anything is the only one at this table with a plan. The room was very quiet. For the first time, I didn't fill the silence with explanations. I let them sit with the idea that I was not begging for a handout. I was offering to shoulder something they had proven they couldn't carry. Not for them, for me. They didn't agree that night. My mother stormed out of the room, muttering about betrayal and disrespect. My father stared at the numbers like they were written in another language. Mason followed me out to the porch. He leaned against the railing we had painted together when we were teenagers. I never wanted this to be a wedge, he said. The house, the deed. I believed him. Mason wasn't cruel. He was just used to being given things. You didn't create the wedge, I said. Mom and Dad did when they decided who was worthy. Right now, this isn't about fairness. It's about math. He made a face. I hate math. I know, I said. That's how we got here. He laughed once, then sobered. You really want it that badly? He asked. I looked past him at the silhouette of the house against the darkening sky. Did I want the responsibility? The leaky pipes? The endless list of things that would need fixing? Honestly, I wasn't sure. But I wanted something else even more. I wanted to turn the narrative in my own life from "we couldn't trust her" into "we underestimated her." I want the choice, I said. If the house disappears because I ignored an opportunity, that's on me. If it disappears because you all couldn't stop pretending everything was fine, that's on you. I'd rather carry my own mistakes. 2 days later, my dad called. His voice sounded like gravel. We'll sign, he said, on one condition. Here we go, I thought. You promise you won't throw it in our faces if it goes badly, he said. No, I told you so. I almost laughed. The irony was thick. I can promise I'll deal with my own failures, I said. But if this works, I'm not going to pretend it didn't. The signing itself was almost anticlimactic. A neutral attorney, a stack of papers, my parents' names scratched across lines that shifted their claims away. Mason's signature next to a line that read, "Quitclaim," mine under grantee and borrower. The notary stamped everything with a dull thump. When it was over, the attorney slid a fresh copy of the deed across the desk to me. There you go, he said. Congratulations. My mother exhaled like she'd been punched. It doesn't feel like congratulations, she said. It feels like an ending. I touched the paper. The address stared up at me in black ink. The little weathered house on the beach that I had scrubbed and patched and loved for 20 decades was no longer the thing they used as proof I wasn't trustworthy. It was proof they were wrong. Driving down to the coast alone a week later, keys jangling in the cup holder, I half expected the house to look different. It didn't. The paint was a little more chipped. The porch light flickered. The screen door still squeaked. Inside, there were coffee rings on the driftwood table and a sagging couch cushion where somebody had clearly fallen asleep too many times. It was exactly as imperfect as I remembered. For the first time, I didn't see my family when I looked around. I saw opportunity. I saw a place that could pay for itself if I treated it like a business, not a trophy. Jess drove down one weekend and helped me map out what it would take to turn it into a short-term rental when I wasn't using it. We walked room to room making a list, patch the hole in the drywall by the back door, replace the rusty light fixture in the bathroom, upgrade the mattress in the second bedroom so guests actually slept. None of it terrified me. I had been fixing this place my whole life. The only difference now was that every hour I put in actually led back to me. Those first few months were exhausting. I scrubbed and painted and learned how to install a ceiling fan without electrocuting myself. I built a simple website, took decent photos on my phone, and listed the house on 2 rental platforms. The first booking request came on a rainy Tuesday. A family of 4 from Ohio looking for a quiet week by the sea. When their payment hit my bank account, equal to half my monthly rent in the city, I sat down on the floor and cried. Not because it meant I was rich, because it meant I wasn't a burden. I was finally carrying something that once crushed my parents, and I wasn't sinking. If you've ever been told you're too much, too unstable, too risky to trust with anything important, you know what that does to your brain. You also know how powerful it is when you finally see proof that those voices were wrong. If any part of my story sounds like yours, if you have been the problem child or the lost cause while your siblings got the deeds and the praise, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not what they called you. You are what you build, and you are allowed to build it for yourself. The first time my parents came back to the beach house after the deed changed hands, it was as guests. They stood on the porch, looking smaller than I remembered, holding an overnight bag and a grocery sack like they weren't sure if they were allowed in. I had offered them 2 nights during the off-season at a reduced rate, not for revenge, for clarity. They paid the cleaning fee like everyone else. My mother stepped inside and looked around. "You changed the curtains," she said. "Yeah," I replied. "The old ones smelled like smoke." She ran her fingers over the new cushions, the fresh paint on the railings. "It looks nice," she said. "You did all this yourself?" "Mostly," I said. "Jess helped. We watched a lot of tutorials." My dad stood at the window. "Place is booked solid all summer," he said, scrolling through the calendar on the listing I'd sent them. "Didn't know you could make this much." "You didn't ask," I thought. He turned to me. "You're really handling all of this?" he asked. There was no condescension in his voice this time, just something like awe. "Yes," I said, "on time, in full, and the mortgage is lower than what you were paying because I negotiated better terms." He winced, but he nodded. "I'm glad," he said. "I was wrong about you." It wasn't a full apology, but it was a start. Later that night, we sat on the porch, the same way we had 100 evenings before, watching the sun drop toward the water. My mother held a mug of tea, staring out at the waves. "I didn't mean it," she said suddenly. "Mean what?" I asked, even though I knew. "When I called you a burden," she said, "I was scared. We were drowning financially. You were drifting. It was easier to blame you than admit we had made bad decisions." I let the words sit for a moment. "I heard you," I said. "I believed you. For a long time." She wiped at her eyes. "I know," she said. "And I hate that. Watching you do all of this now, knowing we never once thought to trust you with it, it hurts, in a way we deserve." It wasn't enough to erase everything, but it was more honest than anything she'd told me in years. "I'm not carrying this for you," I said softly. "I'm carrying it for me. If it fails, that's on me. If it thrives, that's also on me. You don't get to own the outcome anymore." She nodded. "That's fair," she said. "More than fair." As the sky turned orange and purple, I realized I finally felt something in this house I hadn't felt since I was a kid. Peace, not because my parents had changed overnight, but because their approval was no longer the foundation everything rested on. The house didn't represent their gift or their rejection anymore. It represented my choice, my work, my ability to take something messy and make it livable. These days, I spend a few weeks each year there by myself or with friends, in between guest bookings. I drink coffee on the porch in the mornings and answer emails from my laptop. I repaint the railings when the salt eats away at them. I send confirmation messages to families who are about to create their own summers of grilled cheese and board games and late-night storms. Sometimes, when the place is empty and quiet, I walk over to the framed copy of the deed I keep in the little hallway. I read my own name on that paper. No one had to give it to me. No one can take it away with a word. If you're listening to this and you've been living under labels your family slapped on you, burden, disappointment, irresponsible, too much, I want you to know they don't get to be the final word. You can't control what they did with what they were given. You can control what you do with what you build. Maybe your version isn't a beach house. Maybe it's a business or a career or just a small apartment that's entirely in your name. Whatever it is, it counts. If stories like this help you feel a little less alone in the mess of family and money and expectations, stay with me. There are so many of us who were written off too early. Next time, I want to tell you about a woman whose parents skipped her wedding and then tried to move into the house she bought without them. She taught them very calmly that access and ownership are not the same thing. And if you've ever wanted to draw a line between those two, you won't want to miss it.